This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Falcons analyst Jarvis Davis and Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman. The Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So 2024 gave us some moments that are encouraging for 2025, in large part because of four guys who are tops in the league. We'll discuss, and we'll talk about some high praise from Michael Penix Jr. Also, one former Falcon called it quits while another got his flowers this past weekend, and it's time for the Underwear Olympics, but we'll get into that. First, we want to wrap our 2024 evals today. So it's our final in-depth end of the season evaluations for 2024. So we're talking receivers and tight ends. Jarvis, I'll ask you to grade the receivers and tight ends. Give me your thoughts on where the Falcons need to improve for players they keep, players they let go, and you let me know if you think they need to decide to upgrade the receivers or the tight ends through the draft or free agency.
As far as the receivers go, I feel like I have to go with a B plus. Even though you know what, I'm feeling a little giving today. I'm in a giving mood.
A minus.
So I'm gonna go with an A, because you were talking about 8 yards away for having two wide receivers with 1,000 yards. Ray McCloud having a career high by a long shot, almost triple what he's had as a receiver, from a receiving yard standpoint. So I feel like I have to give it an A. Can I even throw Ike Hilliard's name in there, right? Him coming in saying, establishing the fact that, hey, Ray-Ray McCloud is going to be a wide receiver for us. This is something new for him. This is what we expect from him. And for him to come out and have a career year, I think, you got to give this whole group as a whole an A. And as far as the tight ends go, everybody know how I feel about Kyle Pitts. So he kind of had like a meh type of year because he was so up and down. But he put Charlie Warner, though. Like, I have to give him an A grade, because he put Kyle Pitts on the bench. Yeah, offense moved more effectively when Charlie Warner was in there, especially from a blocking standpoint. The man was putting in work throughout the year. So I feel like I have to give the tight end group a B because of the up and downness of Kyle Pitts, but Charlie Warner having such a great year, because a lot of people wonder, like, okay, why was he one of the first guys that they signed when free agency started last year? And Charlie Warner answered those questions, and I think he passed with flying colors.
How about you, Aaron? What grade would you give the wide receiver room? What grade would you give the tight ends room?
Yeah, I'm in the similar boat as Jarvis. Like, if we're talking about the wide receivers, given that Darnell Mooney far exceeded my expectations and probably a lot of people's expectations in terms of being, up there with being one of the most explosive receivers in the NFL, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That to me deserves an A. Drake London having a career year, Ray McCloud having a career year. And even though Cordero Hodge didn't put up career numbers, he probably had more highlights this year than he had in previous years with some of the big plays that he made, especially, to cap off that overtime win against the Bucs and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So overall, I got to give the wide receivers an A as a collective group, just because all of those guys seem to sort of exceed expectations. And then for the tight end group, it's similar what Jarvis said. Like, if you're looking at Kyle Pitts, you're probably like grading him in the C range. You're looking at Charlie Warner, it's in the A range. And so it balances out for, like, I'd probably give it a B minus, just because we're weighting it a little bit more heavily towards Kyle Pitts, given the expectations in the season. But I think in overall, that group of players that the Falcons were able to revamp this offseason, because Lord knows they didn't revamp any other areas of the roster. But that one position group, those two position groups, the wide receiver and tight ends, were the areas where they did invest this offseason. And so they got a good return on those investments at those two positions. So A and B, I think, for wide receivers and tight ends.
Yeah, and I think that's what actually worked in free agency the best this particular season. So, Tori, perfect timing, because we are in our final round of evaluating the position groups from 2024. So I was just asking the guys and want to ask you as well, what grade you would give the wide receiver room and what grade you give the tight end room for 2024.
Yeah, wide receivers, I'd give an A. I thought Drake
Totally
London
agree.
was as advertised. I thought that Darnell Mooney was somebody who, at the beginning of the season, I was like, put him on your fantasy team. I really, really liked the Darnell Mooney acquisition.
Mhm.
I thought that Kadarius Hodge, even like in his
Yes.
role playing, did well. So I was very pleased with what I saw from the receivers. Tight ends, I mean, you have to I almost feel like you have to evaluate the tight ends in a different scope, because Charlie Warner, I'd give an A, because what you ask of him is in run blocking. And I loved watching Charlie Warner run block every single game. There was not one game where he didn't make one block where I was like, there he goes. Like, I'm such a fan of like Charlie Warner's game and have been since he was at Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I'd give him an A, but I'd also, like, when you talk about Kyle Pitts, it's like the front half of the season, maybe I give him a C. And then in the back half, maybe the middle points of the season, I give him closer to an A, but then it falls off back to maybe a C. So it's kind of a little bit all over the place with Kyle Pitts, based on, I think, a lot of factors. Himself, Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix, but I just always go back to the fact that Drake London has been so successful regardless of who's been his quarterback. And I always think that it's tough for me to evaluate Kyle Pitts at this point in time. So I give Charlie Warner an A. I give Kyle Pitts maybe a B minus, C plus.
Yeah, that was about where we were as well.
Great.
Like, you literally, it's
Right,
like you're already here, Tori. You're literally at all the same grades.
Everybody listening is like, she just said the same thing they said.
Yes. Yeah. No. I love hearing your part too, because it's interesting to see how we were all in line with the receivers. Every comment was the same.
Yeah.
And then when we got to the tight ends, we were shaky on how we were going to put it, because it was so like Charlie Warner's here, Kyle Pitts is here. And so where is kind of the middle ground? How do you kind of get to the curve, if you will? So I think that's kind of how we got to the B minus space. So Aaron, give me your thoughts on where the Falcons might need to improve for the receivers and the tight ends that they retain, but where you feel like maybe in either room, both rooms, they could upgrade.
Yeah, I think Ray McCloud far exceeded the expectations that I think a lot of people had when the Falcons signed him, where the expectations were this guy's going to come in and be a return specialist and, be a, special teams guy only and not really contribute on offense. And he was a regular contributor on offense. But I do feel like, no offense to Ray McCloud, who's coming off a career year, like the Falcons can probably get better there, right? They could probably get somebody that maybe is a little bit more consistent with some of the blocking stuff that they're asking him to do. And I think Ray McCloud is as good a blocker as you're going to find in this league for a guy that's like 5'9", 190 pounds. But at the same time, like, given the stress that this offense asks for him, like, you probably sit there and go like, yeah, I feel like Drake London, or a bigger wide receiver is probably better suited for that role. You see what sort of Cooper Kupp is in with the Rams in a similar role, being 6'2", 220 or whatever pounds he is. And I think you can get a bigger, tougher blocker. You could probably get a guy that's maybe a little bit more dynamic in terms of being able to stretch defenses. That has never been something that Ray McCloud has been great at. He's always been more effective being that guy with the ball in his hand, with the screens and the gadget plays and all that stuff. And you saw some of that. So I do feel like, as good as Ray McCloud was, given the expectations, I do feel like, given what the Falcons are asking that number 3 wide receiver to do in their offense, they can probably get better at that one specific position. And then, of course, when, talk about the tight end position, you're like, they need to get more out of Kyle Pitts, or they need to get someone who can do a little bit more of the things that they want at that position. So that's the low hanging fruit, but I'll focus on Ray McCloud for this stuff.
Yeah, I think like I'll bounce off of the Kyle Pitts notion. I think it's the fact that you have the general manager at the end of the season being like, we need more out of Kyle Pitts, to Aaron's point. I think if Kyle Pitts wasn't a number 4 overall draft pick, perhaps we feel different. If this is the 2nd or 3rd rounder, I'm like, okay, like that's fine. Like the production that you're getting, cool, awesome. When you put a number 4 overall draft pick on somebody, it's really, really tough to get past kind of the lack of production when compared to Drake London, Bijan Robinson, and what the expectations for Kyle Pitts was and the mismatches that he could present. I think like my biggest thing about it is like, I don't know where this thing goes with Kyle Pitts, but I feel like there has to be some type of decision made. And I don't know. I don't like this whole like idea of someone's future, or at least the next step of a future, the next year of a future being a little bit kind of going back and forth and like, what are they going to do with him? What are they not? And I honestly feel like I need to know more about what the Falcons are thinking in terms of what this next year could look like. And if he's a part of trade packages, if they're really trying to move on from him in the next year and save. I mean, he's playing on his 5th year option. So I think someone could be willing to pay that and put him together in a trade and it work out. But there's also a part of me that's like, would the Falcons feel super, what's the word? Like that they want to keep him around just to say like, give him one more year to find that number 4 overall production.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I don't know what the right move here is. I feel like giving him 4 years. Yeah, he was hurt for 1, but like, I don't know where you go from that position at this point in time. And I'm hoping to find out more as we go up to the combine this week.
Yeah, because it is a tight ends rich, wide receiver rich type of draft class. And also, Tori, again, not that we know for sure, but I think, I say before the Kirk Cousins benching, I probably would say, yep, Falcons, nah, they're not going to do it. They're not going to let Kyle Pitts move on because that's their guy that they drafted, and they're just going to give him one more shot to make it look like that was a good pick or worthwhile pick. But they finally put their foot down and said, sorry, Kirk Cousins, we got to, send you to the bench. And then basically said, I said what I said at the end of the season. That's the thing that gives me hope that like the experiment didn't work with Kyle and we just need to move on, and we'll be bold enough to move on. So yeah, but it's still very interesting to see how it's going to work out. And this combine might tell the tale. And anything with the receiver room, Tori, that you feel like, hey, I need to see an upgrade there?
Not really. I really liked what I saw from the receivers. I'm curious to see what they do with Rondale Moore. If they decide to keep him around, if he's somebody, I know he's very, to Free's point, you're not getting any bigger. I think you're actually getting a bit smaller if you're inserting Rondale Moore into the lineup a bit more. But I do kind of like the idea of a Cooper Kupp mold, and I'm not just to echo Free, but like knowing where Zach Robinson originates from and who Zach Robinson has worked with. I mean, I don't take that for granted, like the history of what he comes from in the Sean McVay tree.
And that's why I feel like they need to take my moniker that I've established this offseason. Like, go young and cheap, baby. Let's go. Go find you a wide receiver. Like T mentioned, this is a wide receiver rich draft. Like, I mean, the top end talent is not there, but there is value as you go through all these wide receivers. And that was prevalent while we were down at the Senior Bowl. So there are some guys that you can get that kind of fit the mold of what you want to look like on offense, not necessarily going the whole basketball power forward type thing with Arthur Smith, but you want to get some guys in here that have a little size and they can put their hands on guys and they can move, because there were times throughout the season where Raymond McLeod was on the end of like, bro, what you doing? Just like at least breathe on the man. So you can ask him to do what's so much, right? Because that's why he was a specialist, right? Because of some of those things that asking him to do that he could not do as a wide receiver. And a lot of teams, they need their wide receivers to be able to block, but that's how you get those 75-yard touchdowns. I remember I was watching the episode when D-Led joined us last week, and he's saying like, hey, I think it was his long for the year was like 40-some yards or 50-some yards or something to that effect. So how you break those long runs, saying Saquon Barkley, you got doggone AJ Brown and Devontae Smith out there blocking. Devontae Smith is the biggest, but he does have the height, right? At least to get in the way. So I think that's the next step for this offense from a wide receiver standpoint, getting some guys that's young and cheap and fit the mold of what you want to look like going forward.
Indeed. So 2024 gave some moments that are encouraging for 2025 in large part because of 4 of the guys we just talked about who are also thought of as tops in the league. So we'll discuss that when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. So for those who love using FanDuel's live betting feature, maybe it's because every moment of the game is made more exciting. Whether you're backing a team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, never feel like you've missed a chance. And the app is easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly with FanDuel. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. This is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Aaron, as you so aptly mentioned to start the show, it is list season as we have that little lull between the end of the regular season or postseason rather, and the combine. And so the Falcons, of course, didn't finish. When we were looking back at last year, we're talking about where they finished and kind of some of the good we saw. And Pro Football Focus actually thinks the same because they recognize 4 Falcons on their top 101 players list. Bijan Robinson at 15, Chris Lindstrom at 29, Drake London at 31, and Jesse Bates at 93. So first question for you is, did Pro Football Focus get the ranking for each of the 4 correct?
Well, I'm not going to get too much in the nitty gritty of, who's the 93rd best NFL player versus who's the 79th best NFL player. I'll leave PFF to do the math on that. But I think they got it right with the 4 guys. I probably would feel, Jesse Bates should be a little bit higher. But again, at the end of the day, you made the list. It's not that big a deal to be 93rd as opposed to 39th or whatever. I'm not going to get too bent out of shape about it. So I think for the most part, they got it right.
Yeah. And for you, Tori, what do you feel makes each of those 4 worthy of making that 101 list?
I mean, I think it's the production that we've seen from them, not just in this last year, but I think over the course of their careers. Like when you are talking about the best 100 players, like it's not just like a 1-year thing.
Yeah,
like,
it never is.
It's not like a 1-year wonder type of thing. Like I think you do have to take into consideration body of work, which is another reason why I agree that maybe Jesse Bates should be a little bit higher up, but that's beside the point. I think that people are recognizing more and more that Drake London is worthy of the pick that he was taken at. I think people love watching Bijan Robinson. I think that lovers of the game understand, and students of the game understand why Chris Lindstrom is one of the best guards in the NFL. I think that all of those things go into those picks for those 4 guys and why they ended up there and where they are. I also agree that I don't know who else you would put from the Falcons at this point in time, but I think the 4 that were chosen were the right 4.
Indeed. And for you, Jarvis, when you look at those 4 that made the list, what for you makes each of them worthy to be in that top 101, to be in that conversation?
I mean, because when you think about plays, right? Like when the Falcons needed a play on 3rd down, who were they looking for? 5 was there. When they needed someone to turn a run that was -3 into +5, who was that guy? 7. Right. So, and when you needed, Chris Lindstrom to be able to solidify, Caleb McGarry and how comfortable they are in the run game. And when you needed a yard, you went to that right side of the offensive line because that's where your guy is. That's where your $20 million annually, guy is over there, right? And we need to go over there to take advantage of that. We need to use all of that when it comes to getting down in the nitty gritty. I remember Aaron talked about a lot going into the season about how they need to be able to get yards when everybody knows what you're about to do. And I feel like they did that a lot better than they did last year in 2023. So for me, like, you understand why Chris is there. You understand why Bijan is there. You understand why Drake is there. And of course, like, I was always looking for a play to come from Mr. Bates, like Jordan.
Yes.
Like, when you're in need and when you need a play is to be made specifically on this defense, when there aren't that many playmakers on this defense at this point in time. Like, I know that I was looking at Bates. I was looking for Jordan. I'm like, all right, Jordan, it's time. It's time for you to come over here. And that's why those guys made this list.
Yeah. And going back to the wide receivers, it's interesting, Tori, because as you mentioned, everyone's starting to realize that Drake London was worth his weight in the pick where he was selected. And when I went to look back at the list, it's all those other guys that we talk about constantly, right? An AJ Brown or a T Higgins or Justin Jefferson. He's right there on that list with them. And again, we already knew that, but I just think, to your point, it's like the world is kind of thinking that, and we know, and I can't think of his name, forgive me, but it's always that 1-2 punch between Chris Lindstrom and that other guard where they say, okay,
Quentin Nelson?
Yes, I think so. Is that sounds familiar? I mean, that sounds about right.
Yeah. I mean, when he first came to the league, oh my gosh, he was amazing.
Yeah, and I'll definitely think about who it is and circle back to it. But yeah, he has been one of the top two. They're probably more 1A and 1B, to be quite honest. So good to kind of see him there. But yeah, Jesse Bates, 93, seems a little bit low, but we also know a lot of it is about winning. So there's that. But just to confirm, I think I heard somebody say, I think the 4 who should have made the list. Did we have anyone else that thinks that there's someone from the Falcons team that should have made that 101?
I mean, to me, the one guy that I would probably think you could make a case for was AJ Terrell. But I think the way that the Falcons play on defense isn't really conducive to AJ Terrell to be kind of, because when you're thinking about, okay, a top 100 player, you're thinking about, this is a man coverage corner that's going to shut down his side of the field. And that's not really how the Falcons play defense. When the Falcons asked AJ Terrell to play that style late in the season, he performed that, but you didn't get a whole season of that to, I think, merit what you're looking for in this top 100 list. So he's probably the one guy that you could make a case got left out, but I think circumstances led to him being left out, and it's hard to really make a case that he's deserving given what he's asked to do in the Falcons defense.
I completely agree with that. It's like one of those things with like name recognition. Yep. And weirdly enough, AJ Terrell has never been somebody who from the national landscape has been someone that people consistently talk about, regardless of how well he's playing. And to Free's point, I don't know if that's because of what he's asked to do and how little we hear his name in a game setting. Yeah. Like you think about like broadcast and like, you're not hearing AJ Terrell's name, but that doesn't mean that what he's doing is not impacting the game. But I don't think that's enough to like warrant people wanting him on a top 100 list, even if one could argue, is he one of the best corners in the leagues? I think absolutely. But do people know him? Do people know his game? I don't think so. And the people who come on this list and who make this list are people who you have the name recognition of.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with like these websites like PFF, right? Like, oh yeah, look at the numbers of when Justin Jefferson went up against AJ Terrell. Check. Just AJ Terrell won that battle. And I think that, the coaches have to put players in position to succeed. I talked about that, going into the bye week, and then obviously Raheem Morris got involved and like, hey man, I need you to start putting these guys in situations so they can be successful. And I think that the more and more AJ Terrell is put in those situations, though, meaning those one-on-one matchups, those following you wherever you go type matchups, and those numbers get thrown out there, the more people are going to gonna follow, because you know how it is. It's just groupthink. It's a lot of groupthink that goes on when it comes to opinions about players, especially this time of year. Oh my gosh. So I feel like the more and more that happens, the more he's put in those positions, and I know he's going to concede because we've seen it, right? And I feel like that's when he'll start popping up in these lists, because we know he doesn't necessarily have the personality of that guy. Say, hey man, y'all don't see what I'm doing right here. He doesn't have the real Reeves doesn't have the list on the people on the island and all that stuff. You know, those guys don't necessarily exist. I kind of missed that in NFL. But anyway, yeah, he's not that guy. So I feel like the more and more he's put in position to be successful in those situations, I feel like the more people, the national media understand like what he brings to the table on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I would agree with AJ Terrell. And I think too, quietly, Caden Ellis and how he kept getting better and better. You put him in the right position, he gives you results. Again, you're playing on a team that was a losing team, a team that doesn't have coaches who are out there, talking about you and how good you play all the time. So a lot of that does make a difference. And just before we wrap, I wanted to ask you guys, and anybody, all of you can answer, but give me a Falcon who, if he made the list next season, that means we'll almost certainly be talking about this team having made it to the playoffs because he played good enough to be in the top 100.
There is one name and one name only. It's Michael Penix Jr.
I like it.
One name.
Yes.
One name.
I got to go with Arnie Ebiketie. If he somehow pops up on this doggone list, get about 13, 14 sacks, and a couple, like 7 or 8 TFLs, oh my God, the Falcons will be in the playoffs for sure. For sure.
I'll piggyback off of Tori. It's Michael Penix. If he's good enough to be a top 100 player next year, almost certainly the Falcons are in the playoffs next year.
Oh, gosh.
Man,
that sounds so good right now. Oh my God.
No, right? I thought you guys would like that question.
That get me excited.
But it's the truth. Like, you've got 4, and that's great. But when you start looking, and granted, you're talking about the world champion, so there's that. But when you start looking down that list, you don't just see the Eagles, but you see all those teams that made it to the division, the conference championship, who made it to the
multiple guys.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Multiple guys. Like, it's not just, oh, that's a guy or he's a guy. Like, what do you guys say? It's not like a Jimmy Joe situation. It's like, no, this guy, when he gets in the game, you already know there's going to be some impact. That guy is going to change the game. So I like both of those picks because obviously I've always been an AK fan. The only guy I ever picked in all my years of covering the Falcons, and they actually picked him. So that's my personal bias towards him. But yeah, I think you guys are right. If Michael Penix goes off, man, this show will have so much fun. It'll be a real party again. Anyway, speaking of Michael Penix, he had some high praise that we'll tell you about when we run it back. So, Tori, Michael Penix Jr. spoke with ESPN's Mark Raimondi recently, and he gave his thoughts on the Falcons' offense. And obviously, we're not surprised that he was optimistic. As he should be as QB1, but then he won up that, saying the Falcons are the best offense in the league. Quote, I feel like we're the best player for player. I feel like we're the best out there. We just got to go do it. So for you, is this offense the best in the NFL as currently constructed? But if not, what do they need to do to be that?
I think you can't call yourself the best until you are the best, or at least winning games like the best.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, right now, this offense, though, to the point of what Michael Penix is saying, I do agree. They have significant pieces. And I do think that they have pieces in place that can be successful and can work well as a productive offense. But if you are not consistently scoring points, that doesn't matter. And I think that what is going to be the difference for this team is simply that, just getting in the end zone. I think that there have been so many times where we talked about this offense in the last year where they were moving the ball well. And then you get inside the 20 and things just stall out. And then you had issues with the kicking game and you couldn't rely on that. And points became really difficult to come by. Mm-hmm. And the best offenses in the league are offenses that score points and score points consistently. And mm-hmm. I think that's going to be the difference for this offense is like, how can you get in the end zone more consistently? Because you have to. In order to win games, in order to be considered the best, you have to get in the end zone. You can't just settle for field goals left and right. And then that's just kind of the nature of it. I also think that there is something to be said about a clutch gene. I think the fact, like, as much as people want to hate on Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, like, when it comes down to it, 9 times out of 10, they show up and they end up winning because of this like weird clutch voodoo magic that they got going on. And so I think that there's something to be said about these like gamers as well. Do the Falcons have gamers that can just turn it on and flip a switch inside of 2 minutes and will themselves to a victory? Because like at this point, I can't sit here and say the Falcons are the best offense because I have nothing to back that up. Like Michael Penix has, you know, he has conversations with the guys and he has his opinions and how he feels. But we all have to go off the facts. And the fact of the matter is like, we've only seen this offense for about 3 games. And in those 3 games, it kind of was a little bit high and low, which can be kind of expected. But it's finding consistency and getting in the end zone more times than not. And that's the marker of a good offense, the best offense.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Tori. My mind kept going over like that progression for the Eagles, right? Where they kind of started off where you could see shades of them being able to score, and then everything became about their defense. But in reality, they scored 40 points, really should have scored 44, but they scored 40 points in the Super Bowl. And not just that, but the 2 weeks before that, they smoked the Commanders. So you have to be able to, like you say, they were on mission, but they also showed some clutchness. I think they showed some dog. That's always huge for me. Like, I'm going to win this battle. No matter what the battle is, the battle can be in the trenches. The battle can be to get to the second level. If it's the running back, the battle can be the 50-50 ball and wide receiver. But yeah, we've seen it. And like you said, with Patrick Mahomes, I remember Jarvis being in New Orleans saying 17 wasn't enough. 24-0 still didn't make me comfortable because that guy was over there with that gene and had other guys on that offense that had that gene as well. So yeah, I think that's a great call, Tori. And for you, Jarvis, when you think about best offense in the NFL, would you call this the best offense? And if not, what for you is something that you need to see in order for them to be that?
Well, they're going to have to score 4 touchdowns a game. I mean, because you're talking about elite offenses, the top 7, top 8 offenses in the league. They're hovering around 27, 28 points. And then the best offense of the league was the Detroit Lions. They scored 33 points a game. So if that's your goal right there. If you're talking about being the best offense of the league, you're scoring at least 4 tuds a game. So for me, I can't call them that because they haven't done it, right? But I think there are some, like Tori mentioned, there are some pieces. They do have pieces that can get them there if everything goes right. And of course, if the quarterback stays healthy, I feel like they'll be able to get there. Which is why I'm okay with Michael Penix saying stuff like that, right? If you don't believe you're going to be the best, why are you doing it? And like, that's not, especially on the league level, right? Because it's either one or two things. Like, I'm in it for the money or I'm in here to win football games. We've seen Myles Garrett say, hey, man, my goal coming into this thing wasn't to get the can. I'm trying to win a Super Bowl. So that kind of puts you in the mindset of like, all right, what am I in here for? And it's obvious that Michael Penix wants to win. And he's even talking about bringing the Super Bowl to Atlanta. I mean, and when you see, and that starts with mental, right? You have to have the mental makeup to say, you know what? We are the best offensive league because I see the guys that are on this offense from a personnel standpoint, and I feel like we can get it done. But you have to do it. You have to put it on the field. Like even Jeff Ulbrich was like, hey, man, ain't no time for talking, man. We just got to go out there and be it. We got to be what we think we can be, and they haven't done that yet.
Yeah, and Aaron, I think Jarvis makes a great point. I always like to say when I see an offense going down the field and then they get into the red zone, especially for me, I'll look at the high red zone and say, okay, I still want to see a touchdown. I still want to see a touchdown. To me, that's the completion. I don't want you getting inside the 20 and giving me 3 points. So when you said that, Jarvis, that just kind of resonated a lot with me. But for you, Free, when you look at this offense, best in the league, if not, what do you think you want or need to see out of this offense to say maybe after next season, yeah, it is the best?
Well, it goes back to something that Kirk Cousins said last year, which is perception versus reality, right? The
Yeah.
perception can be that you have the potential, whether it was going into last season or going to this season, that you have the potential to be one of the best offenses in the league. And I think most people would look at the Falcons and the pieces that they have and think that is the perception, but then it's on the players to go out there and prove that reality. And I think when you look at some of the stats, talking about red zone, talking about third down conversion, they were like top 5 in the league in the last 3 games of the season.
Mm-hmm.
But, some of that was owed to going against some defenses that weren't particularly good, like the Panthers and the Giants. And then when you look at the game against Washington, who didn't necessarily have a juggernaut of a defense, but certainly was playing at a playoff caliber level, you saw the offense kind of struggle. And so I think the real challenge for this Falcon team is when they're facing those playoff caliber defenses like Washington, who they'll have a rematch against this year, Minnesota, Buffalo, San Francisco, Miami, some of these teams that have some of the better defenses in the NFL, they have to go out there and perform at the level of one of the top offenses, something that they struggled to do last year when they faced, Pittsburgh and some of these other teams, Kansas City and whatnot. And so, like, to me, if they can overcome that, that's where you start to be in that conversation of they are a team that is consistently showing up against some of the better competition that they're seeing. That's when you can have that conversation about them actually living up to the reality of being one of the best offenses in the league.
Indeed. Well, Tori, I know you have to head out. She's going up to Indianapolis, right, to cover the combine. So just a quick question for you before we wrap. Headed up there, officially begins Thursday, obviously, and ends Sunday. What's that one position group maybe that you're most intrigued about seeing in person?
I mean, it has to be the edge rushers, right? Like, it has to be, because that's who people are going to mock to the Falcons all day, every day from now until we get to them being on the clock at number 15 or wherever they are. I think honestly, I'm just as interested in seeing that position group in person, but also this is the first time that we're getting Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris since everything happened with Kirk Cousins and since kind of everything happened since the last time they spoke. So that's going to be a big marker of conversations and how they feel about Kirk Cousins and how they feel about moving forward with him, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of threads and a lot of storylines to pull on, and I'll be on Radio Row. So make sure everybody follow me on Twitter, but also the AtlantaFalcons.com YouTube page and everything like that. We'll be talking to Terry and Raheem, and then also a bunch of national media just to get the scope of kind of how people feel about the Falcons from a 5,000 foot level. So I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, I'm about to go get on a plane.
Safe travels, Tori. We appreciate you.
Awesome. Bye, you guys.
Bye-bye. So guys, one former Falcon called it quits while another got his flowers. We'll talk about that in the look ahead. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. So if you love using FanDuel's live betting feature, it's because maybe it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing a team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, never feel like you miss a chance with FanDuel. The app is easy to use also, and when you win, you get paid instantly. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, guys. So we got a little news over the weekend about a former Falcon and, well, two former Falcons, one who's saying goodbye, one who was honored. Let's start, Aaron, with the one who said goodbye. Keanu Neal announced his retirement from the NFL after 8 seasons. On Sunday, the Falcons, of course, selected him first round 2016, made the Pro Bowl in 2017, but we know his career also got derailed by injuries. Only 4 games between 2018 and 2019. The good, the bad, or the indifferent. What will you remember most about Keanu's career?
Well, I did a segment on Keanu Neal on my most recent episode of Locked On Falcons, basically saying I will never pass on an opportunity to talk about Keanu Neal on the Locked On Falcons podcast because he was one of my favorite Falcons. He was just a fun player to watch. Unfortunately, injuries kind of cut his career short in terms of being, I think, one of the best safeties in the NFL. Given I think what most people remember about Keanu Neal is the sort of highlight reel hits that he delivered to several NFC receivers across his and tight ends across his NFL career. But I think the thing that gets lost in the shuffle with Keanu Neal was just how good a player he was in those first couple of years in coverage, sort of being the tight end eraser for that Falcons defense, whether it was a Jimmy Graham or Rob Gronkowski or Greg Olsen. Some of those guys that he was able to keep in check in a lot of those games, and sort of being kind of that X factor in their defense. I remember very vividly a 2017 game against the Bills where the Falcons were playing Tyrod Taylor, and his scrambling ability was really giving them problems. Like they had Deion Jones kind of spying him, and there was a couple of third downs in that game that Tyrod was able to shake Deion Jones and extend some of those drives. And then in the second half, the Falcons made the adjustment like, Keanu, stop Tyrod, and Tyrod's scrambling was no longer a variable in that game. The Falcons ultimately still lost the game. But it was one of those things where it's like those were some of the elements that I don't think get valued for Keanu Neal throughout his career, early in those careers. And he was on a trajectory to be one of the best safeties in the NFL. And unfortunately, injuries sort of cut that short. And unfortunately, he kind of bounced around the league, kind of been a journeyman, because that era, he was like perfect for that era where, the Seahawks style defense with the box safeties, Cam Chancellor, everybody was trying to play that style of defense. And the Falcons got a legit Cam Chancellor like player at that position. And then the league kind of shifted. We're like, we're not playing that style of defense. And so he was just kind of a perfect fit for that time in the NFL. And unfortunately, like circumstances and whatnot. So a great career for him, but one of my favorite players in Atlanta.
Yeah, Jarvis, I got to say that Keanu Neal was one of mine as well. I love the griminess that he played with. I love the grit, and I love when he got to the podium. He was that same guy. Like, he was gritty and grimy in practice. He was going to let you know he was on 10 at the podium, and then he was going to take it to the field and produce. Yeah, and then like you said, Aaron, just one of those guys that unfortunately his body wouldn't hold up to the genius that he could have been, the brilliance that we could have seen in his entire career. So yeah, wraps it up after 8 seasons. Jarvis, for you, what do you remember the most about Keanu?
First thing that comes to mind when I think about Keanu Neal, ding, ding in the dirt. I had to slow that down a little bit, right? He was one of those guys for me, and those are the type of safety that I absolutely loved, right? You're talking about Steve Atwater, you're talking about Sean Taylor, guys, Cam Chancellor, like Freeman mentioned, guys who just throw their bodies into folks, trying to inflict pain on them. And like Freeman mentioned, that was like the transition. It was like he came maybe a little bit, too late into the league. If he would have come in maybe a year or two earlier, oh my gosh, we'll probably be talking about him in a different light, I feel, because that was so valued back then, to be able to erase people literally, out the air when they come across the middle. So I think that, Keanu Neal is a guy that it was one of those picks, initially, but oh my gosh, when he put on that uniform and he came out there, you understood exactly why DQ, brought that a guy like that in, and he was a difference maker when he was healthy. So it's just unfortunate that he wasn't able to sustain that health, because I really wanted to see what that would look like, because unfortunately, Sean Taylor, we lost him for other reasons, right? Because he got his life taken, and it just kind of, for me personally, it puts him in that same category, because like I felt like we didn't get a chance to see his full potential. And Keanu Neal is that guy for me, and I will always admire him for what he did and what he brought to the field, and when he was a Falcon.
Yeah, and Terance Mathis, another Falcon who produced at a high level while he was here. He was inducted into the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame this past weekend. Of course, he was with the Falcons from 94 to 01, and I voted for him for his induction into the Georgia Hall of Fame, the Sports Hall of Fame, if you will. So for Terance, when you look back at his play, Jarvis, what do you think about him? What comes to mind?
the TNT combination, right? Tony Martin, Terance Mathis, little guys out there just balling, doing their thing. And, Terance Mathis actually went to Redan High School, which is kind of like these semi-rival type school to my high school, Stone Mountain. We look exactly the same, just different colors, right? So, that was always kind of like a nice back and forth. But him to come out of that school and be able to do what he did when he came play for his hometown team, like I appreciate him. And now that he's gotten into coaching and and doing his thing now, I feel like this is what these are the type of things that you don't necessarily set out to do once you start playing, but once you get those type of achievements, I know for a fact he kind of like just smiling inside, because to be able to accomplish those things and have the impact that he has had, as a player and now a coach, I feel like this is something that I know he appreciates, and I appreciate watching it as well.
Yeah. What about you, Free? When you think about Terance Mathis, what comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, Terance Mathis, you got to be of a certain age to really remember Terance Mathis. I am of that certain age, so I do remember his time in the 90s. But it's fascinating when you look at his Falcon career, because, we were talking about Ray McLeod. Like, Terance Mathis spent 4 years with the Jets as purely a return specialist. Like, he was not a big factor in their offense. He gets to Atlanta, immediate Pro Bowl, playing in that run and shoot offense, was basically their number one receiver for like the next 6 years. It didn't matter whether it was Eric Metcalf or Burt Emanuel or Tony Martin. Like, all of those guys, it was like a revolving door at that number 2 wide receiver. But the one sort of consistent through line with Terance Mathis was he's that number 1 guy. You saw him be that possession guy. You saw it, especially in that 98 season, him and Tony Martin just stretching defenses. It was just like, hey, Dan Reeves' offense is like, run the ball to Jamal Anderson, dial up some play action, and just, Terance Mathis and Tony Martin are open down there somewhere, just throw it up Chris Chandler. And that offense, guided the Falcons to the Super Bowl. So Terance Mathis has a fascinating career. When we talk about, these homegrown players, like, he's like the poster child for that, as Jarvis said, where it's just like, you took this guy that was a homegrown guy, went to New York, didn't really have success. You bring him back to Atlanta, and his career blossoms into this Pro Bowl caliber player. And it's like, every time the Falcons sign like a Lorenzo Carter or somebody like that, that's what they're hoping for. But like, it makes you appreciate, Mike Davis, all those guys. It makes you appreciate Terance Mathis even more, because he lived up to being that hometown hero.
Yeah. And I think the only one that we can think of in recent memory is AJ Terrell, who's actually living up to that hometown hype. But yeah, to your points about him and his coaching career, I think he really has found his sweet spot, because of course he started off as an OC with Savannah State and actually continued to move up, coached at Blessed Trinity and Fellowship Christian, and then of course is the current head coach for Morehouse College. So yeah, I think he has found his sweet spot when it comes to Act 2 of his career. So guys, we know where Tori is headed. She's headed to the Underwear Olympics, and we're going to talk about what we want to see out of the Underwear Olympics in just a moment. So yes, it's that time. NFL Combine time officially begins Thursday with D lineman ends and linebackers. Although, as Tori mentioned, we'll hear from Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris on tomorrow. I think we'll hear from them Tuesday. And then, of course, Friday, it'll be DBs, tight ends. Saturday, QBs, wide receivers, running backs, and the Combine wraps Sunday with O linemen. But let's start with the obvious, which is everybody's eyes are going to be on Thursday to see really what the Falcons are thinking, who they're watching, who we're watching. D-line, ends, and linebackers, guys. Those are the position groups. So tell me what groups, if that's not the group you're looking at, tell me which group you're looking at. But if there are players that you are looking to see how they're going to perform.
This is the wrong group of individuals to have on the podcast to talk about another position.
To give variety, right?
Tori should have stuck around a little bit longer, because maybe we would have talked about another position. But yeah, it's all about the edges, the linebackers, the D linemen. We're going to do the thing every year. As Tori said, it's the position that's going to be mocked to the Falcons. Will the Falcons actually take one in round 1? We'll see. We'll get there in April, but it's going to be the topic of conversation. And I think this edge group particularly is a very athletic group of individuals. So I do feel like this week is going to be very telling and to see how many of these guys kind of pop with the testing, running the 40s and doing all the other drills and whatnot, that really kind of, that's a position group, especially where, athleticism matters, especially on the defense side of the ball, because defense is played in a style where you have to react to the offense. They're always at a disadvantage. So you need premium athletes to be able to react quickly to all the things that offenses are doing. And, the fast and physical thing that Dan Quinn did, that Keanu Neal embodied, and all that stuff. So I think the combine testing, particularly given we're going into this offseason with the Falcons having so many needs on that side of the ball, is going to mean a little bit more, because you want to have those difference-making athletes out there. And I think this edge group particularly has a lot of guys that can really pop in. For me personally, because it's like Abdul Carter and then like a jumble of other guys, I do feel like this combine testing, who are the premium athletes? Who are the guys that you're like going to sit there and say, okay, this guy might not be ready to come in day one and be a difference maker, but because of that athleticism, because of those traits, those physical tools that player possesses, you're willing to bet on that guy to see where he is in year 2, year 3, and whatnot. And so I think that's going to be really important for this particular group of players.
Yeah, and Jarvis, seeing as this combine, this draft class is so rich in defensive linemen, linebackers, edges, ultimately, who are some of the guys that you look at or you're looking to see, okay, is that guy going to fit the Jeff Ulbrich and the Raheem Morris philosophy and how they run their defense?
You know what? To be honest with you, and kind of add to what Aaron is saying, like, edge is going to be always my focus.
Yes.
Just
as it should be.
7 years, man. We've been waiting for a long time.
Waiting.
So for me, I'm almost getting to a point where I'm gravitating towards that interior defensive line, because that is an intriguing group of guys as well. We talk about guys like Deion Walker, the big defensive tackle out of Kentucky, Walter Nolan, who really popped down at Ole Miss. I've been seeing him being mocked like maybe top 10, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, okay, and I think that what happens in this process, when these guys are so athletic and they go out and run these 4.4 and 4.5s, like those guys, what happens is teams that have them on a certain spot on their board, they like, okay, let me go back. And that's what you want if you're a prospect, right? If you're a Donovan as a Raku, like if he goes out there and run a 4.5, they're like, oh, let me go back and pop this tape in, or you want Terry Fontenot to say, hey, let me go and see, it might be willing to take this guy at 15. And that's what you want. So I feel like once you have your group of guys who you already like, and you go in there and they pop athletically as well at the combine, that's going to be a lot confirmation for a lot of guys. But for me, I'm gravitating towards this interior defensive line, because, guys, I've been looking at this. I've told y'all all offseason, I've been looking at these monies that they can save by cutting 2 guys. I don't know if they're going to be able to do graded, but man, if they do on your model, they're going to have to eat somebody that can come in and make an impact right away, because you can't afford to have that big of a drop-off. If you put a guy like Rukororo in that spot, if you cut David Onyemata and he's playing next to Grady, and there's a drop-off from David Onyemata, like that wouldn't be good at all. It's a lot of like moving parts on this defense that Terry Fontenot is going to have to play these cards right. Like, if he wants his defense to look anything like being serviceable to an offense that can potentially put up 4 touchdowns again.
Yeah. And I think you're probably likely to see Grady Jarrett still there, just maybe with a restructured contract and David Onyemata gone. So yeah, probably do need to look at what that replacement looks like. And to your point about David Onyemata's productivity dropping off this season, you kind of need somebody who can get in there, and at a minimum, they need to be able to produce at his level, but really you're hoping they can produce more, because man, asking Grady to continue to do all that work in the trenches is a lot, especially at his age, still coming off that injury as well. Sure. But I will say this, obviously I'm like you guys too. Thursday, after our football party Thursday, and probably before, my eyes are going to be glued on what's going on in Indy as well. But I also think Friday might be intriguing, because that's DB day. And we were talking about, when we were going through the position groups, how, the Falcons are good to go with AJ Terrell, no problem there. And Jesse Bates III, no problem there. But we were not at all sold on them with Justin Simmons. And I think we were kind of on the fence with Mike Hughes. So I think there's an opportunity and some intrigue that could come out of day 2 as well.
Yeah, I think just from a cornerback spot, I think they have to look at like being young and cheap. Like they got to step to the script, baby. Like you have to go get young and cheap on from that aspect. And I think that Mike Hughes is an interesting piece, right? If you like a safety a little bit more, I wouldn't mind bringing a guy like Mike Hughes back into the fold, and working that out with him, and because we understand, like from a veteran standpoint, what he brings to the table. He exceeded my expectations, but what you have to bank on and understand as a general manager, Terry Fontenot, okay, is he going to be able to give me that again? 1 year older, So I really feel like this is, like he said, dude's gonna have to play his cards right, and I think that corner, safety. That's something you have to make a decision on. Are you okay with DeMarco Hellens coming back as your starter, right? Like he saw some flashes there. Yeah, he got that ding in the dirt type vibe to him. So don't laugh at me like that, Free. Come on now.
You got it in twice.
I slowed myself down so I can say it right.
I appreciate that you got it twice on today's episode. So.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying, man. I'm 2 for 2, baby. You know what I'm saying? We out here. I'm in the Hall of Fame. We playing baseball. So, but I think that's the main thing for me is first round, it has to be edge. Second round, okay, what you gonna do? Are you gonna find one of those highly valued corners or a highly valued safety and take a chance on the guy in that spot?
Yeah, Free. That's what I was thinking as well. Like, I think this show would implode if that first pick wasn't an edge. But I think this town would implode if we're being honest.
I'm taking a drink live on air. Like
exactly.
Sorry.
The content will be incredible. Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
And look, Jarvis, I don't think anybody would begrudge you for doing that because
I'm taking a shot, bro.
I just don't think people can take it. But I think ultimately where the intrigue could be is the second day, because you're looking at what the Falcons will do Free with that second round, 4th round, 7th round pick. And that's where you start getting into, but yeah, you can still get a quality DB in one of those rounds.
Yeah, I think you're right, T. What direction the Falcons go after round 1, because of course they are 100% definitely going to take an edge rusher. There's no doubt about it. They will 100% take one in round 1. Yes. But the big question, no one, expects them to go in a different direction in round 1, but no one really knows what direction they're going to go starting on day 2, right?
Yeah.
Do they look to trade back or whatever to acquire more picks in that? Talking about Kyle Pitts and whatever you can get for him, if you wind up moving him this offseason, the Kirk Cousins of it all that sort of stuff. So if the Falcons can accumulate more picks, they'll have more opportunities. And I think this is where, like, the combine is going to be important for whether or not the Falcons feel good about certain position groups, which will potentially influence what they do in free agency, because you're kind of hoping, whether you go corner, safety, linebacker, all of these are positions of need for this Falcons defense. And you're like, can we cross one of these spots off the list in free agency so that that's just one less position group that we have to worry about sort of addressing in the draft, given the limited resources that the Falcons have. And so I think that, these next couple of days in Indianapolis is going to help sort of distinguish it, where the Falcons can really weigh what the talent level looks like at corner versus safety versus linebacker, and weigh that against some of the options that they may have at some of those positions heading into March and whatnot. And so that's going to really, I think, impact their ultimate decisions later this April.
And you got Saturday, Jarvis, where we can take a look at the QBs, the wide receivers, the running backs. And we talked about, obviously, you've got QB1, right? And QB2 is probably going to end up being a veteran, if we're being honest. So I don't think that Terry Fontenot is going to spend an inordinate amount of time looking at quarterbacks Saturday. But maybe a wide receiver might be in the mix.
Absolutely. I think so. Like you said, there is, I don't feel like there is top end talent like we saw last year, right, with the wide receiver spot, but there is some value you can find in these mid-level rounds. And if you're talking about trading back from 15 to 18 or 19, because like Free mentioned earlier, there are a jumble of guys that are kind of on that same level, and it's all about, I use a Terry Fontenot a word, there are different flavors of edge guys, right? So if your flavor, you feel like your flavor is going to be there at 18 and you trade back and get a third round pick, ooh, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Or you get 2/4 or something to that effect, and you can trade up into the third round. Absolutely, you should take a look at that wide receiver spot, because there was some weirdness going on with Ray McCloud, towards the end of the year, where Cardale Hodge got to start, and you know what Cardale Hodge is. Like, I don't think that he can give you something right from that spot, but you want to be able to get a guy that's young with a high ceiling in that spot. I feel like that will make more sense for me, because Ray McCloud's been in the league 7 years.
True.
Who knows how long he has? Who knows how long he's going to be that fast twitch guy that can take the top off of defense. So I feel like wide receiver is a spot that they should be taking a look at in those mid-level rounds.
Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with Aaron and his frequent guest analyst Jarvis as your second listen. And as Tori mentioned, check out some of her work at AtlantaFalcons.com, but she'll also be on that Falcons YouTube page giving you up-to-the-minute coverage of the NFL Combine. So maybe you can get into the minds of Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris. We will see you next time.